Hello, welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 classic Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for Playing Dippy, released in 1936. It's the 120th in the series, and it's directed by Tex Avery. You can find this on the Porky Pig 101 DVD set, and a HD restoration has been made available, sort of on and off streaming, but hopefully one day it'll make its way on physical media as well. It is under copyright. You can't find the full thing here on YouTube unless Warner Brothers themselves choose to upload it on their own channel. But in case you haven't seen this one, Porky decides to join the Air Corps after declining the Army and the Navy, and we see a whole bunch of gags involving Porky going through his training. And in the third act, we see Porky getting into a plane that is remote controlled and goes out of control, and we'll certainly go through all that with you. And by we, I mean my good friend S.C. McPeter. He sent me a recording discussing this short, as it is important in ways that you may not realized. So let's get SC on board to kick things off and begin the discussion as to why this short is more important than what you may think it is.
Hello everyone, I'm here, SC, in person, well, on video I suppose, or just on mic, since Anthony does all the editing and the producing. But yeah, I'm here to discuss Playing Dippy, the first cartoon to give Porky Pig the starring role. Yeah, this is really the first Porky. Almost immediately, Avery has taken a shine to the rest of the characters. But before I get there, I'd like to just quickly recap to how Avery got here. He got his job, and the first cartoon he directed was Gold Diggers of 49, which almost immediately after we recorded the Bob Clampett auction that had happened, we got some drawings that showed it originally was going to be a film within a film with the characters from I Haven't Got a Hat filming it. And I don't know if that was an idea that the studio itself gave to Avery or if it was an idea Avery himself came up with but scrapped. Judging by the artwork, I'd have to say maybe it was an idea someone at Schlesinger's gave them, but I'm pretty thankful that they cut that out of the final film. I don't think it would have worked for this. You'll notice that the cartoons say featuring Beans, and on the fire alarm it says featuring Ham and X. Looks like Schlesinger was trying to see if any other characters beyond Beans as their main star could work. Evidently, Avery must have suggested, hey, let's give Porky the starring role. He got most of the laughs in the Gold Digger picture. And Schlesinger, I guess, felt that it worked, especially since Gold Diggers was a more competent picture than what he had already been getting. So we get Playing Dippy, which still has some of the I Haven't Got a Hat cast within it, but Porky is explicitly the star.
And one of those interesting things in hindsight is how people would look at Porky as a no-brainer to be a star of a series versus all those other characters that were trying to push, like Beans and Ham and X and all of that. But we, of course, got the benefit of hindsight, whereas then, there's no guarantee as to which character is going to be a success or not. I mean, even 5 or so years later, once Bugs Bunny entered the scene, nobody knew that he was going to be a breakout character. But it's quite clear that, yes, Tex Avery saw something in Porky, and wisely so, and again, in hindsight, it's easy to see why, because he just stood out. He's his own character. Whereas the other characters are more or less Mickey knockoffs in their own certain ways, sort of happy-go-lucky characters with no main personality. And that sort of a character is hard to write for. Even the Disney studio had trouble writing for Mickey Mouse himself. That's why they had to introduce all of these wacky characters around him. And sure enough, those wacky characters ended up eclipsing Mickey's own popularity when it came to his shorts. But in terms of other trivia, probably the most notorious one has to be that this short is apparently the first short that went through the infamous Korean redraw process that happened in the late 1960s. For those that don't know, it's when they took the black and white shorts and they traced every other frame, so therefore they could show it off in color. You know how when you do a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy and the quality decreases each time? Well, it's a similar effect here, except it went really bad because they didn't trace every single frame. But thank goodness we now have the proper black and white short, as it should be. Apparently they colorized it again through a computer, but even then, it's completely unnecessary. This was made for black and white, it should be shown that way. But what we're going to do is go through the short from start to finish and go through any other observations within. So my comments will be in between SCs. And yeah, we'll just go through other points as to why this short is more important than what most people may think.
It starts with the animation credits to Sid Sutherland and Virgil Ross, two of the people that Avery brought over from Walter Lantz, as well as Cecil Surrey, who didn't get credit. and we pop into Porky's head. It's a really odd way to do it because it just is a bit of an awkward drawing, and then it transitions to him walking on profile, going along the enlistment camps. But I think this is a really good way to establish it. Porky is feeling patriotic as the actual Warner Brothers themselves were. I'll talk more about that in a different cartoon, but Porky, he's going up. He's considering the army but isn't sure. And then he goes by the Air Corps and decides that's what he wants to do. He wants to fly. And we get this really nice little scene where it continues with the theme that we heard over the titles, I'd Love to Take Orders from You. And I think this is a really brilliant decision by Avery. It seems Freeling and Avery were taking more challenges in the music of their cartoons, unlike Jack King, who just seemed to be okay with one song being played as a bit of a foxtrot throughout the cartoon and being sung once by the characters. No, we have some pop songs that are being used to show on-screen action. In this case, a song that Avery would direct a melody based off of not too long after, I'd Love to Take Orders from You. And it's used really effectively here because that's what he's going for. He's going to enlist and take orders from a general.
And another thing about the music is I like how you hear the theme, but every time he stops in front of the poster, we hear something that's relevant to it. So when we see the army, we hear a brief rendition of You're in the Army Now, and then in front of the Navy part, we hear a brief rendition of Nancy Lee, which is a song I'm actually not familiar with, but even if you're not familiar with it, it definitely sounds very Navy-esque, for lack of a better word. I'm not sure how close Avery was when it came to music selections or how he collaborated with the musicians, so later on it'll be Carl Starling, of course. But we're seeing some strong storytelling here from Tex Avery, showing that Porky wants to sign up somewhere because he's a patriotic little pig. But we've also got the music emphasizing the beats in the story, that he's turned down 2 places and he ends up at the 3rd. One thing I've noticed when it came to Tex Avery is that he was always about the gag and he was never really about character consistency. So the other interesting thing is when you see Porky here, he's back to being not a child, because obviously children can't enlist in the Army, Air Force or whatever, but he's definitely comes across as a lot younger than he was as a character in The Gold Diggers of 49. Over there he was a full-grown dad. And we'll hear in this short that the Porky character's voice is also sped up as well.
We get this nice little scene that also establishes Porky's stuttering as well as his timid nature, where Porky is asked what his name is, and of course he writes out his stutter, which I'm sure was a gag they would have used otherwise, but I think here it works very well, especially because of the execution where it isn't immediate that he's writing down his name, and more so afterwards he is reading this long drawn out name that of course ends with him saying narcissist, pig.
There, write it then.
My name is... Porky. Cornelius, Washington, Otis, Lincoln, Abner, Aloysius, Casper, Jefferson, Filbert, Horatius, Narcissus, pig.
I did find it amusing that in the story sketches or the storyboard for this cartoon, this was all written out instead of just later on. So good on Clampett, Avery, Jones, and whoever the writing team was. I think Ben Hardaway must have been on this film. I'll explain why later, but yeah, we get I'd Love to Take Orders from You during this, and then we get something here that never shows up in any of the buddies. We get a really good exclamation for why things are happening. We don't know that Porky is qualified because in this film, unlike some of the other ones with the cast, all of the characters are children, and they're all, especially Porky, who's of course a junior in the Air Corps, so they have to test him out.
So that initial scene with the sergeant is great. Now, for those who don't know, at this point in time, Porky Pig is voiced by Joe Doherty. Now, Joe Doherty had a real-life stutter, and the problem that a lot of the directors had was that he could not control his stutter, so his recording sessions would take a long time. Eventually, he'd be replaced by Mel Blanc, who could control his stutter because, of course, he's acting it all out. So here, you'll notice that Avery is at least using the stutter to his advantage. I do wonder, though, if there was supposed to be something else in this scene. Avery couldn't get what he wanted, so he changed it to what you see here, where we just get the bits of him trying to say his name, and he can't, and maybe he's just recorded that whole sentence and managed to get it out of Joe Doherty in one later take or something along those lines.
Well,
I want to learn to. I want to learn to.
what's your name, bud?
My name is.
Here.
In fact, that airplane sound that Porky makes could be just a sound effect by Treg Brown, I don't know. But we also hear that the sergeant is Billy Bletcher, who was one of the main voice artists at the studio at the time. I mean, he was everywhere, but he did a lot of voices there before Mel Blanc became the prominent voice actor. But this scene's great, and it does play on the whole starter thing, which, okay, if you do this sort of thing today, it may be frowned upon, and I totally get that. But at least here it's done in an interesting way. And Porky's name, of course, chef's kiss to that.
We also see a little bit of surprise in the Gags again. When Porky goes on to get the suit after he's made okay, it's a size too big, but we don't see it at first because of the way the door comes out and we get the slight reaction. That's really good timing, and that's a thing that didn't happen before in any cartoons, really, that sense of surprise.
And speaking of surprise, I love that little bit of dialogue when the sergeant looks inside the uniform and we hear a little hello. I'm pretty sure that's not Joe Doherty. There must be someone in the staff or something just adding that in. Love that delivery of that one line. It's so unexpected.
So the first test they do is the dizziness test, which is nicely acted out, and we get Beans in the only scene. I think that shows very well how much Avery cared about using Beans as a character because, well, what did Beans do? He just draws a line that the general himself could have done beforehand, and he just walks under the desk. I think that really captures a lot about Beans' character and how much it meant to a real genius like Avery. So Porky, of course, he spins around the whole room and doesn't go around the line. I don't know if the sobriety test was a thing at this time, but that's essentially what it is.
I love the way this scene is done. First of all, when you see the titles, you see the whole titles spin as well, so it's just that little cherry on top, I guess. But the fact is that there was a toy that's still around. It's like a spin top, and I like that this kind of a test was conducted as though Porky's a spin top toy of sorts. So it's short, sweet, and does the job. But yeah, I like the fact that we have Beans in here in a cameo, and that just shows perhaps how little Tex Avery actually thought of the character. Or maybe he wasn't thinking at all, he just needed some generic character in the scene and just said, oh, well, we'll just use Beans. So either answer is acceptable, really.
And then we go on to target practice, nicely established with the gunshots into the title. It's this filmmaking that, again, we didn't really see earlier. Avery is really thinking of making these cartoons not just funnier, but also just plainly better, staging them like actual films using these techniques. And again, we get another little surprise where the smoke covers off the execution, where Porky does not end up shooting the target plane until he just smacks the gun. That's another really funny bit, and it's played out perfectly. The pacing and formatting of this cartoon is really good.
It's a great little scene, and if you're familiar with Tex Avery's later Spot Gag shorts, you can sort of see the outcome here, but it does make one wonder where the Spot Gag shorts that Tex Avery would do were a few years away, but when you watch a short like this, you can sort of see the origins of what the sort of shorts he would end up doing, where he would have shorts having a common theme, and there would just be different gags around there. So the whole beginning of this short with its different gags, it plays out like a Spot Gag short that Tex Avery would do later on. So again, this is another reason why this short is important, whether most people realize it or not.
So Porky is ready for duty, although he's not necessarily ready for combat or training on the planes yet. No, he's given the broom and he's ordered to go to test out the weird scientist lady. Now, Mr. Anthony, I have a problem. Who is voicing this character? It's a very odd voice. It reminds me of like a female Billy Bletcher, but I don't have Keith Scott's wonderful cartoon voices book with me to check on hand. Can you tell everyone who is the voice of this lady?
Well, I've got the book by Keith Scott on hand, so again, if you don't have this book, it definitely belongs in any serious cartoon fan's library. But I already mentioned Billy Bletcher as the sergeant and Joe Doherty as Porky Pig. You have Bernice Hansel doing the voice of Little Kitty. And for those that don't know, she would do all of the so-called cutesy voices that were around in the 1930s. Now, here's something that's going to surprise a lot of people, because we were talking about a certain director before, how Tex Avery shorts improved so much against Jack King, right? Well, as it turns out, Jack King does the voices for this Professor Blotz and the dog owner.
Get a load of this. Get ready.
Yeah, Jack King. How about that? Oh, and he also mentions staff voices for crowds. So probably just people lurking around. Hey, we just need a few extra voices. Sure, why not? And that's that. So yeah, there you go.
Thank you, Anthony. Now, Avery is using more liberty with the music he's playing, which also became a Merry Melody, although directed by Friz Freleng not long after. And once again, we're getting a nice establishment because they are a bit of a kook. And of course, they're like, get a load of this! And we get to see what becomes the centerpiece of this film, the radio-controlled plane instructing voice commands.
Go up. Go down. Try it.
And after getting us commands, she lets Porky try. And Porky, of course, this stutter is lagging the controls a little bit. And we also get some nice timing where it almost crashes. And again, the lady disappointed sends Porky to work. So there's some sympathy with Porky. He's a bit of a child and he's a bit of an outcast in this.
So this is a great establishing scene. So, of course, we've established our setting and why Porky's even in the Air Force in the first place. Now we're setting up in our second act what's going to happen in Act 3. And it's really straightforward. You've got this scientist person saying, hey, take a load of this. And the scientist just mentions commands and the plane just follows. Some technology, they don't even have anything like that even today, which is interesting. So this person must be a real genius. But as you can imagine, as SC already mentioned, we play upon the whole stuttering thing again. And yes, we have an issue with the plane.
Go down.
The good thing about this scene is that not only does it set up what's going to happen in the third act, it's also a gag in itself. So it's not like busy work that it's like a lull in the short before we get to the really fun stuff. You can still have fun even setting up the better stuff later on, if that makes sense.
But she leaves the radio apparently on and next to a window where some kids are playing. We see little Kitty, and this is a good time to bring him up. I'll talk about him when I go on Shanghai Shipmates, hopefully, but we see a character I just call Dud. This kid with the glasses that shows up in I Haven't Got a Hat appears to have been the only character to have survived, getting rid of the other ones because he appears in Shanghai Shipmates. He's also in Hollywood Capers, and I think he might be in one other cartoon, but this kid with the glasses, the teeth, the hat, he must have had a name somewhere, and he must have been part of the cast like Tommy Tortoise was, or Tommy Turtle, who wasn't even named in any of the cartoons, so it was on at least one piece of publicity. So evidently this little dud, as I like to call him, must have had a name. And yes, Anthony, you can say it. I've got the dud. But anyway, he brings out his dog Bodo, and little Kitty begins to play. And this is some really great comedy here, getting comedy out of confusion, and we get to the real speed of the cartoon. Gold Diggers of 49 is a great cartoon, but this one, we're already seeing improvements to Avery's cutting and speed. We're getting, as soon as we get the balloon from Kitty, Porky's airplane immediately goes to crash into this hot air balloon. Right before, we also get the great comedy of the plane wagging its tail as a funny visual. And we're already seeing the speed of the plane.
Your tail, Odo.
Get the balloon!
Yep, so Avery already established one thing, which is how the remote control device works, and then he takes to the next step, which is the whole thing where two kids are innocently talking about a dog being able to do tricks. And I love the animation of the plane itself, how it responds to the commands, how it's alive in a way it shouldn't be. But I like the fact that we get some simple stuff in the beginning, wag your tail and so on, but then it's get the balloon. And just shoots up, goes towards the other balloon, like this plane has a mind of its own. Like, I guess this is AI before AI has become a thing. But yeah, I agree with SC. The timing in this one has definitely improved. And not to say Gold Diggers 489 is a slouch in timing or anything, but it just shows that every single time Avery does something, he always tries to improve in the next short. He has repeated gags all throughout his career, but every time he does so, he always does so with in mind to go one step further than what he did before.
It's really believable tension and surprise, especially since Porky himself is just confused. And again, we get some whimpers. I'm not terribly big on when animated characters cry. I always feel like it's a little bit unbelievable when it's just in small doses. But here it does, again, give some sympathy to Porky, who is confused and becoming scared of the Air Corps.
And that crying noise that Porky does, I don't think it's Joe Doherty, just like before in that scene where he's in that oversized uniform. I think that must be one of the staff members. I could be wrong, but Keith Scott's book doesn't exactly elaborate as to if a staff member did those voices or not, but I'll let you guys be the judge.
So we go through all of these gags that are all about the speed, all about the tension that Porky could get hurt at any moment. And while the staging isn't quite there yet, I think this one still does a really great job.
And again, some of these gags that we'll see in the last act, Avery would repeat it in various ways, like how the plane smashes through the building in that way, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, not only is this plane incredibly quote-unquote smart, but it's also pretty strong. It's like, wow. You'd hope that people weren't in that building where Porky smashed through them, otherwise he would have caused a lot of death and destruction right there.
Just because I don't want this to be too long for Anthony, I'll highlight some of my favorite parts, which is I like the little circus acrobats. I like that it also uses a little bit of a budget skip where you don't actually see inside. So you don't have to draw the layout and you can just keep it suspense as to what's going to happen. Of course, we don't see any animation of the tent or anything, but we get the acrobats.
And those acrobats in that initial scene is so ridiculous. I just like the fact that, yeah, Avery, I guess, to keep some costs down, doesn't show exactly what happens in this circus, and yet Porky ends up having these two acrobats doing their routine. I'm not sure why they're still oblivious that they're not exactly in a circus tent, but it's pretty funny. In case you were wondering, that track that plays in that scene is a Johann Strauss song called You and You, and it's from Die Fledermaus, and I'm not as familiar with that entire piece of music, but still, the title itself, You and You, I mean, why not? But it works really well. It sounds very circusy, for lack of a better word.
And they jet ski, of course, using the hippo as one of them, and I always love that little bit.
Yes, the jet ski bit. Now, this is something Avery might pare back a little bit in his future shorts, sort of make the timing even more sharp, because it does go on longer than maybe he would normally do. I don't think it's bad here, but it's definitely not as sharp as the timing in his later shorts. But I like the fact that you've got one of those acrobats always breaking the fourth wall, looking at the audience, sort of letting them in on that, yeah, are you having fun yet, guys, watching this cartoon? But yeah, they go along, and then it just happens to be a swordfish there. Why not? And then Porky ends up going in the water, and I like seeing the scared expression of all those fish as he's going under there, and you'd think that Porky might be drowning, and so he must be good at holding his breath, I guess, but the plane does a loop-de-loop around the water and into the sky, and believe me, if I was in Porky's position, I'd be freaked out as well. But what's really cool is that Avery doesn't just settle on that. That could have just worked as its own thing, and he could have just started finishing off this short and that's it. But no, he ends up plussing it even further by including a cat into the mix. A really weird looking cat. I love the design of this cat, but of course, by adding that, we go one step further and we get even more great gags out of it. So that dog owner says to his dog to sick him.
Sick 'em, Otto, go get 'em.
Maybe he was a real cat hater. That's not very nice, is it? But then this plane sees another helicopter type plane. That's a really weird design. And it's animated as though it's a cat and dog fighting. So it's a nice little touch. And that other pilot is just so bemused by the whole thing. And in a weird visual gag, the actual plane goes through Zeppelin. And instead of saying smoke, Ropo, cigars, the letters are wiped out. So all you're left with is SOS. And this is only something you can do in a 2D animated short like this. It makes no sense, but it is hilarious.
We get the little SSS joke with the Zeppelin, which is always nice. We get some clouds running away from Porky. emphasizing the real power and speed of the plane.
And that cloud bit is so ridiculous. Like, why is it a cloud person in the sky and you got the cloud house? I wonder who came up with that gag. That is just bizarre. And yet, I think it's hilarious.
And then this is why I think Ben Hardaway had something to do with this cartoon in particular. These would have been collaborations at this time. No single writer was responsible for a single Warner cartoon until the late 30s or early 40s. That's when you had voices like Michael Maltese and Warren Foster emerging. And that's if the writers weren't writing them themselves when they were doing a lower budget picture. And of course, there was input from the animators as well in this early period, like Bob Clampett and Chuck Jones. And everyone was attending the story meetings when they were coming up with what the idea of a Warner cartoon would be. And then the writers would outline it further, and then the director would come in and he would make his own suggestions, put in this, expand on this, leave this out. But that's how a Warner cartoon and all cartoons of this period would have been written, except that Disney's probably were really streamlined to make sure that everyone could submit. There were dedicated writers, of course. Now back to Ben Hardaway. I think that this gag here of the farmer with the hay and it turns into straw hats when Porky crashes into it, that got reused in a later Woody Woodpecker, one of the first ones called The Screwdriver. I think it's only the third one with the character. And Ben Hardaway, who created that character, he may have just remembered working on his cartoon and all the speed jokes and just decided to use it. And maybe one or two gags he would have wanted to use but didn't have time to. Although that one's about a fast car, not a fast airplane, so it wouldn't have made sense.
And then in another strange bit, you got Porky's plane approaching these three other planes, and they quickly move out of the way and then quickly go back into place. That one is probably the weakest moment of this short, but whatever, it's only a minor thing. But yeah, we see this next bit, which is basically the kid's just all enamored with his dog and telling it to do tricks, and the dog seems pretty happy. It's going to be very tired afterwards, having a massive nap, as you'd expect. But you can see here a little trick that they use to keep costs down, because you've got so many characters that need to be animated. They just simply have each character doing one little cycle, and they just repeat that cycle over and over. It does the job, and it certainly would have saved a lot of money instead of having each character just animated in full. But again, this is another example of Avery just plussing it even further, taking it to the absolute extreme.
And then we get this nice little conclusion. We get the little montage of all the kids instructing Bodo to do tricks, and then Dud comes over and decides to bring him home, of course. The plane finally decides to go back and rest, and I always thought this was a nice little execution where it's slowing down, but it still crashes into the back of the wall, and Porky, scared as ever, immediately resigns from the Air Corps and decides that it's safer as just being in the army and deciding to learn how to march. So Porky isn't necessarily cowardly, he's just scared of flying now and decides it's better on land. And as you can see, he's happy to march alongside all of his more serious companions.
But when we see the dog actually get tired, because again, what do you think is going to happen to a puppy that's overstimulated like that? But you got the dog owner saying, "Come on, Odo, let's go home."
You've had enough, Odo. Come on home.
Yeah, Jack King, average director, and certainly not a great voice actor either. I wonder why he would have been chosen for that role. Was he just there and Avery needed somebody, or was somebody else supposed to do it but they couldn't get him? It's definitely one of those things that's lost to time. Not exactly a big deal or anything, but just makes you wonder. But the animation of the plane just being like a dog essentially is just incredible, doing all those tricks and then coming in for a landing and smashing through the actual garage. Again, you got some cost cutting there where they don't have to animate all the destruction in this garage, but you can certainly imagine it, and I think it makes it more effective. But then we get the added touch where the plane crashes through the window. Now, you do have to wonder, with all that flying, I would say anyone would be pretty much queasy from that. I know I get queasy when I go on rides that go around in circle for too long, so I guess Porky's got a very strong stomach. But no, this has scared him off for good from flying, I suppose, because he runs off, and he's really quick here. Again, showing speed, and Avery's, of course, experimenting with that. And he ends up going to the army where he learns to march, which is a great ending. It just shows that, yeah, he's patriotic, but he realizes that his initial choice wasn't the right one, and that's pretty much what happens in life, isn't it? Sometimes your initial choice just may not end up being the one you want. Oh, and one other thing I want to point out, this is a very long short in comparison. Most shorts end up 7 minutes or so around this decade. They would eventually go down to about 6.5 minutes later on, towards the end of the 40s and 50s, but here it's nearly 9 minutes, so it's like over 8.5 minutes. So yeah, this is definitely one of the longer ones. But we end right there with the wonderful march at the end.
I really think this cartoon is a real big innovation on where Avery was going. The speed is better. Avery was still considering all the gags and the character beats in the story, which I always appreciate. He was paying more attention to music, the pacing and formats there. Timing's already getting adjusted. He really came into Warner's and he was really starting to do things a bit more overnight than people might give him credit for. And of course, his next cartoon release was Page Makes Glory. I have some suspicions that this cartoon was started later and released very quickly, although I have no proof to confirm this, but I get the feeling that his first Merry Melody may have been I'd Love to Take Orders from You. Don't take my word for it, but after Page Makes Glory, we do get what I think is Avery's first essential film, besides Page Makes Glory, which is a charming Merry Melody, although it's more controlled by the art style rather than Avery's attempts at going further. He's a little bit bogged down by that art style, even if it looks really nice. And of course, Avery always had great design in his films when it worked to his comedy, where I think it does there, but I think The Blowout is the first essential Avery film where he's really pushing gags and story and character. And I can't wait to get to that one for certain reasons that I'll discuss when we get to it. But again, I think this is a particularly well-crafted film and showing just how much Avery was really improving himself and the cartoons overnight, which you can't really say about Jack Hink's films, which stayed pretty stagnant after 1934. 35 and 36 were not great years for him, and quite honestly, he just didn't have the jazz that the younger guys did. Well, I hope you enjoyed my little ramblings about Plain Dippy, and hopefully Anthony has no trouble editing this down to work within the commentary. See you all in another commentary. That's all, folks.
Thank you, SC. So, in the end, yeah, this is one of those shorts where, on the surface, it just looks like a standard Porky Pig short and not much more. But there is definitely a lot to this one, and as we've already pointed out, this is another stepping stone towards the Tex Avery that would become the Tex Avery that we all know and love today. Yeah, some bits are a little bit raw, some of his timing is still not quite what it would be later on, but even though Gold Diggers was a great short and had a lot of great moments of timing, this takes what he did then and plussed it further here. And the storytelling here is top-notch as well, because as SC mentioned, a lot of the shorts of late just didn't really have a strong story. You would have the recent short with Beans saying, hey, I'm Beans of the Boston Beans, and he goes to a movie studio and things just happen, but we don't know why he's there, what his purpose is, and some of you might say, oh, it's just a cartoon, whatever, right? No, you still need that stuff even in a short like this, and here we've established that Porky's patriotic and he wants to join one of the 3 military arms, and he chooses the Air Force, but it doesn't quite work out for him. So there you are. This one gets 8.5 out of 10, even though it's only Avery's second short, such a solid one. It's amazing how he just made top-notch shorts straight away, unlike, say, Chuck Jones, who started off very wobbly at first for a few years until later on he became quote-unquote funny and started making the shorts we all know and love today. But that will do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and until next time, take care.
I want to learn to march.